Hello folks, welcome back to our last week of learning for History of Western Music. Yes, you heard that right, this will be the last week of content for this module. Next week there'll be no module assignment, no discussion questions, just kind of something fun that we're gonna do as a class to wrap up the year. Alright, so History of Western Music. This week we're talking about the composers of the Romantic period, Beethoven, Brahms, and Chopin. As always, folks, you can find this presentation in the form of slides on our Google Classroom if you wish to go through it at your own pace. All right, let's begin. So we're still talking about the 19th century, okay, from about 1820 or so, all the way right up until 1900, or the early 1900s. Remember, Romanticism, okay, the romance as a term, okay, is truly derived in the focus on the individual, the expression of the self, and the interest in being very expressive, being very passionate, okay. Everything in terms of art, architecture, and music are very, very distinct and very fantastic, very flamboyant. Okay, remember, it's that idea of romanticism. We're trying to woo over the public with our music, with our art, with our architecture. And it's that true kind of medieval sense of romance that, you know, chivalry is not dead, and that, you know, you give a girl or a guy a flower and they're yours for life type thing. It's a very medieval sense of romance, not in the sense of today's romance. And that is expressed in, like I said, art, architecture, and especially the sound of the music that is coming out of this period. Okay, and there's a lot of hearkening back to the old time, right? To that classical period of Rome and Greece, to that old time, medieval time of Europe as well. Okay, romance, the trying to woo everybody over, and the true expression of us as human beings, being very extreme in our expressions, as you can see in this painting, right? The person is much laid back with the expression of the devilish child here in the form of a nightmare. Okay, it's very extreme. Everything we do in the Romance period is extreme. All right, remember the forms of Romanticism in music. Okay, lots of new realms of sound, larger orchestras, the kind of the dominance of the piano at this period of time, more instrumentation, the technology of instruments has grown. Artists and musicians are performing and playing and composing more music for the public, as well as for the lower classes to be able to perform music at home, so it's not too complicated. Because remember, in this time period, music was central to that family life. Everybody had a piano in their home, typically played by the females in the house. And the music wasn't that complicated because the musicians, the composers, wanted to gear their sounds, gear their compositions, and gear the ability for people to play their music in that home setting without any formal training, or being a prodigy or a virtuoso in any sense of the word. All right, so we're going to first talk about Beethoven. Okay, in terms of music, okay, his influence lasted quite a long time, almost 60 years. Okay, and his influence in terms of his musical style, okay, still are felt today. We still perform larger symphonies of Beethoven. We still perform solo repertoire for all instruments from Beethoven's compositions. And just so you know, even today, when you are auditioning for music programs at universities and colleges and trade schools, okay, a lot of the required repertoire, a lot of the required pieces that you have to learn, practice, play, and audition with are Beethoven pieces, those classical or those Romantic period pieces, late classical period into the Romance period. So Ludwig van Beethoven lived from 1770 to 1827. Very popular composer and cultural icon even to this day. He was born in Germany. He studied piano, violin with his father, Johann. He moved to Vienna when he was 19 years old. And he studied under Haydn that we talked about last week. Or 2 weeks ago, excuse me. Okay. He lost his hearing. It was slowly deteriorating throughout his life. And by the time he was 32, he had a hearing crisis. And he couldn't quite hear very well at all. And he used a lot of instruments and hearing technology, big tubes in his ear to be able to hear sounds properly and fully. His major works consisted 9 symphonies, 11 overtures, 5 piano concertos, many different other pieces, including 32 piano sonatas, okay, and a few different operas, Fidelio being one of them, Missa Solemnis, and many different church compositions as well. When he died in 1827, okay, the funeral procession where the body in the casket, okay, traveled all the way throughout the streets of Vienna. Excuse me. There were over 10,000 people at his funeral, which is pretty impressive, which tells you something about the influence of his music and what kind of cultural icon he is to the music world. Oops. His career and his music reflect lots of changes in his life. Okay? Lots of these ideas from the Enlightenment period and the French Revolution affected the way Beethoven composed his music and the way that his music ended up being performed in public. Okay? He was idealized, and then he was disillusioned by Napoleon. Napoleon did not like him, and neither did vice versa. Okay, and so his Beethoven's works can be divided, into 3 different periods. From his time in Germany, from when he was very young, up until he moved to Vienna, this kind of new sprung sound coming out of Beethoven when he was in his heyday living in Vienna. And then from 1815 up until his death in 1827, we get a lot of his kind of introspective works where he really secluded himself off from the public and didn't actually allow his music to be performed in public in the later years of his life. But then once he died, his pieces were found and distributed, reprinted, reproduced for the public to enjoy. Excuse me. He had many different teachers. He had many different patrons, people that he worked for, that he played for, and he had many different publishers as well who took his music and published it for wide distribution out to the public. He worked with Haydn. He worked with Albrechtsberger, Salieri. He performed in public, and he also performed in private. And he also taught a lot of well-to-do students. He would not teach a lot of the lower classes because they could not afford his teaching. So well-to-do students, meaning people who were wealthy, could pay for the expertise of Beethoven. Publishers competed for Beethoven's music. He published a lot of music, especially in his kind of middle lifetime in Vienna, and there were different publishers at that point in time throughout Europe who were vying for that kind of the money being made from his music. And so different publishers wanted to be able to do this. Now, in 1802, Beethoven went deaf, and this really took a toll on his psyche, on his psychological well-being, his mental well-being. He considered killing himself, considered suicide, okay? But he didn't, and he wanted to keep his sound going. He still had music to compose and to perform and to get out for the public. And so he did not commit suicide, but he did kind of become more of a recluse. He did stay at home a lot more. He did not perform in public as much. He composed and he occasionally conducted orchestras and symphony bands. But he was slowly, in those latter 10 years of his life, he was becoming more of a recluse. And a lot of the music was not published at that time, and it was found after he had died. His compositions in his later life do seem to reflect the struggle of his life. Okay, his pieces become like narratives, like stories of his life, where we have lots of conflict, we have lots of great moments, we have lots of reflective moments, catharsis moments, reflection. We see a lot of the struggles that he had, especially in 1802 when he went deaf, with just him and his life. And that is reflected in the way he composed, going from happier major keys to kind of more solemn, more sadder, more dramatic minor keys. He took a lot of styles from Haydn and Mozart. Okay, he expanded those styles and made the forms from Haydn and Mozart. He created them to become a lot longer, much longer compositions under those stylistic forms. Okay, the song that we're going to take a listen to is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. You can find all of the songs in this presentation on our Google Classroom. So please have a listen to them as we go through this presentation. Pause this video and then listen to them. So, Moonlight Sonata, composed in 1801. The title was given to Beethoven by Ludwig after Beethoven's death. It was found after Beethoven had died. So remember, he was a recluse. He did not want to share his music once he went deaf in 1802. And the last 10 years of his life were really a struggle for him in his music. And getting his music published was very challenging because Beethoven just simply didn't want to do it. He wanted to keep it to himself. So, pause the video here. Have a listen to this song. Okay, the piano sonata in C-sharp minor called the Moonlight Sonata. Okay, it is very dark. It is right at that time, just before Beethoven went deaf. Composed in 1801. Remember, he went deaf in 1802, but in 1801, his hearing, there wasn't much left of it at that point in time. And so it was a sadder time for Beethoven. So listen for this very sharp, very poignant singing melody that moves slowly in different ranges. Okay, the rhythm or the meter, the tempo, the pace is quite slow. Okay, the harmonies are very haunting, very dark. And the expression is this kind of ethereal expression, this kind of dreamlike mood that Beethoven was trying to express in his music, because it was a time in his life where he was quite sad, where he was struggling, especially because he was going deaf, which for a musician is one of our worst nightmares. To lose our hearing it's not a good thing. All right, our next musician is Johannes Brahms, or Johann Brahms, John. Coming out of Germany as well, born in Hamburg, a very lively city. Okay, but he moved to Vienna and spent the majority of his adult life in Vienna. Okay, very great keyboard player, very great piano player. And he met Robert Schumann, who is also a very famous romantic composer at this time. But Brahms made his living as a piano player, a conductor, and selling his music, publishing his music. His major works include 4 symphonies, 2 piano concertos, many violin concertos, excuse me, as well as so many pieces for keyboard and piano. His most famous piece, a German Requiem, is played in churches still to this day. Very famous church piece. He had a very unique style. Okay, he took a lot of those old school, classical, Renaissance type style of music and brought it back to life in the Romantic period. Okay, lots of beauty in his music, lots of emotion expressed in the piano playing itself. Really romantic stuff. If you ever, girl, guy, if you ever are trying to swoon over someone, learn how to play a Brahms piano sonata, and you will, I guarantee it, 100%, you will win them over. I haven't tried it with my wife, but I should. See if she likes it. I don't know. She's not a big fan of classical music, so we'll see. So his piano music was highly individual, right? Very, very based on the solo performer. He didn't write a lot of music for orchestras or bigger ensembles, okay? The traditions, Brahms met with Beethoven. Brahms did not meet Beethoven. But it was just after Beethoven had died. Brahms did take a lot of traditional music theory and styles from Beethoven and incorporated them into his music. So Brahms wrote a lot of chamber music for the church. Okay, he wrote 24 chamber works, including 3 piano trios, 3 piano quartets. He also composed a couple of symphonies, but they are not really performed as much today as they were back in the the early parts of the 20th century, the early 1900s. Brahms' characteristic musical style included a lot of melodies, these sweeping melodic lines that were exceptionally beautiful, easy to listen to, not a lot of minor chords, very, very romantic style of music. And now, if you take a look at the photo here, his hair, how can you not have romantic music from a guy whose hair is this beautifully flowing? Come on now. He wrote a lot of choral works, as we've discussed. Okay, and he drew on the entire range of music, right? Going from the lowest low notes to the highest high notes and all the rhythmic complexity in between, right? This is what romantic music is all about. Creating that emotion from the lows to the highs, from the very, very slow to the very, very fast. His piece, a German Requiem, this is the piece we're going to talk about, is a very large chorus piece, but it is very, how do I say, as I say here, right, how lovely is thy dwelling place. Very romantic, very sweeping, not a lot of dun 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 dun, but it's very soft, very flowing, very melodic, and essentially very beautiful for the Romantic period. So, just before you pause the video to have a listen to a German Requiem by Brahms, let's talk a little bit about it. It was composed in 1868. There are 7 different movements, so 7 different parts to this piece. What you should be listening for, okay? The melody is very lyrical, very, very song-like, very wave-like, very nice, rondo form. Okay, we've talked about rondo before. The harmony, okay, it changes between major and minor keys, but it starts and ends on a major key. Very nice, very flowing. Okay, the expression that Brahms wanted to bring forward in his German Requiem was the emotional expressions of loss and acceptance of death through the painting of his music. Okay, and so it goes into minor keys, but it is a much livelier piece than the piece we looked at from Beethoven. Okay, it is still kind of that solemn, very, very nice flowing piece of music. So, pause the video here, have a listen to Brahms' A German Requiem. By the way, the text here is from the 4th movement, okay? But I will post, I will post all the movements together, as well as a separate fourth movement from the German Requiem. All right, our last composer is Frédéric François Chopin. Frédéric, or Freddie, as I like to call him. His name, Frédéric, by the way, can be spelled with a Y here instead of, Y here, Frédéric, instead of an ER, or an E, excuse me. It can be, the E can be replaced with a Y. Okay, he was born just outside of the capital city of Warsaw in Poland. He is both a composer and a piano player, a very prominent piano player. He did move to Paris when he was 21, and that's where his career really settled and took off. He had a lot of affairs, but the main one was with an author, Aurore Dupin, as well as with a baroness. She was a baroness, excuse me, Baroness Dudevant. He's a very promiscuous fellow. He had many different lovers, many prominent people, famous people in the courts throughout Paris. But his Chopin's major works are for piano. He did create some symphonies, okay? But his major works are for the piano, including concertos, sonatas, etudes, and piano waltzes as well. He did die quite young. He was only 39 when he died, but he contracted tuberculosis, TB, as we call it today, which is not a good disease to get, but he did die at a very young age. It would have been very interesting to see him live a little bit longer and to have been influenced a little bit more by both Beethoven and Brahms. It would have been, but in his short time of 39 years, he did compose some of the world's most famous pieces that we still play today and that we still talk about today and that we still actually spend money on their recordings, even to today. So his etudes, okay? An etude, by the way, is a very short piece of music, okay? A very, very fanciful, melodic piece of music that we often still play today. Okay, and he wrote a lot of them. The one that we're going to listen to is Chopin's Revolutionary Etude. Okay, there was an uprising in 1830, just before he died, in Warsaw, and this was composed just before he passed away in 1831. It is very fast-paced. The tempo is very quick. Okay, very fiery, lots of ranges in the notes to give off that revolutionary, emotional kind of run-cha-chan war feel. Okay, and that's what he wanted to express in this etude. This kind of revolutionary sense of, yes, we can defeat the overthrowers, the higher people, the aristocrats of Poland in Warsaw. Keeping in mind that he composed this when he was in Paris, so he wasn't in the country itself, which is probably a good thing. But it's very, very revolutionary sounding, very kind of like triumphant type sound of music. Before you pause the video to listen to Chopin's Etude, just remember, pieces of music in both the classical and the romantic time period were all given numbers. So Chopin's Etude number 12, okay, is called the Revolutionary Etude based on the stylistic sound. But remember, pieces of music from both the classical and the romantic periods were given names because they were so popular. Most music is just given a number, but if it was a very popular piece of music that people really enjoyed, it was given names. And this one by Chopin, the Revolutionary Etude, is very, very popular and still played today. What you should be listening for is that duple, quick, fast-paced meter. Very virtuosic, very fast, okay? Lots of quick notes, 16th notes being played. The harmony is in this dark minor key because it starts off right? As this kind of foreboding before the revolution, before the happy times, and then it finishes and he erupts in a C major key to finish off the piece in this very triumphant Rancachan moment. Like I said, the expression is very fiery, very emotional. Revolutions are very, very emotional. They're emotionally driven. They are very ecstatic. There are lots of going on, and Chopin has expressed that in his music. Have a listen to it, and that will end our presentation. Thank you very much, folks, for listening to this final week of the history of Western music. I hope you learned something. Like I said, next week we're going to do something fun. There'll be no video. There'll be no discussion question for next week. But this week, don't forget to answer this last discussion question on the history of Western music in the Romantic period. And as always, if you have any questions, folks, please feel free to fire them my way. Have a wonderful week ahead, and thanks again for listening. Bye for now.